gentlemen, welcome back to Watch More Movies. I'm your host, Ricky, and today we will be talking about one of the newest releases in theaters, The Running Man. The film is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, which was earlier adapted in a 1987 film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. The new 2025 remake is less of a remake of the original film, but more an adaptation of the original King novel. This one is directed by Edgar Wright, starring Glen Powell, Josh Brolin, Coleman Domingo, Lee Pace, and many others. In the near future, The Running Man is a game show where the main contestant is on the hunt for 30 days from real assassins. The film follows Ben Richards, played by Glen Powell, who is desperate for money to help save his sick daughter. As a last resort, Ben enters The Running Man. So this was quite a mixed bag for me. I'm a huge Edgar Wright fan. Shaun of the Dead is one of my favorite comedies of all time, and I talked about The World's End in a previous recommended episode. I was not a fan of his previous outing, Last Night in Soho, though I admired what he tried to do and really tried to get out of his witty and comedic comfort zone. It just didn't work, and this one felt like he had a bit of shackles on his signature tone and feeling. In The Running Man, there are great flashes of Edgar Wright charm, especially his scenes with Michael Cera coming in, but aside from that character being introduced, there isn't much of his flair he usually has. It feels tonally very all over the place, feeling much more like a studio action film than an Edgar Wright film. Glen Powell, who I love as an actor and is poised to be a young Tom Cruise-like star, which many people have already said, but I couldn't agree even more with, feels very miscast here. I can't quite tell if that's the screenplay's fault or if it's just a casting fault altogether. Going hand in hand with the tone, he feels stiff in scenes that are supposed to be witty or even some of the emotional beats, where he feels much more in Edgar Wright's zone and perfect, where he's playing that zip and flashy Wright kind of character in moments that are all too brief. He doesn't really give much room to be that kind of character that Edgar Wright's so used to having, and just kind of goes between stoic and witty and goofy at times, which does not really mesh well together in this. The action is fun for sure, and not as much of a CGI slop as you would expect from this big of a production, but the issue I have is it definitely wants to be very violent, but feels very constrained in doing so, even for being an R-rated film. There's lots of moments of shots in the head or, blood splattering, but it doesn't really feel like it quite goes there like it really wants to. It feels like it's the most safest R-rated, kind of violence that there could be. Now, that doesn't make or break a film, but it just feels very inconsistent and doesn't really feel like it's what it was intended in the first place. I do hope Edgar Wright can get back to his consistent charm of films because it isn't quite like it used to be. I still do recommend The Running Man overall. It was entertaining enough. I think it just comes off more of a disappointment because Edgar Wright, for me, expectations should be much higher, and this just isn't there. It was enjoyable and fun, but personally, that's about the highest I can get to. Now, before seeing the new one, I did want to visit the original 87 film before this one. 1987's The Running Man stars Arnold Schwarzenegger, follows a distant future where the country is in a totalitarian police state, and Ben Richards, at the time played by Arnold, is a soldier who is ordered to shoot from a helicopter on a group of innocent civilians protesting. He refuses and is sent to a prison while being framed for the actual event of the murder of those civilians. From there, similar story to the remake, where The Running Man is a game show in which prisoners face off in deadly matches against gladiators who try and hunt them to try and win the freedom. If you've seen any other Arnold film from the 80s or any time, this is in a very similar vein. It's very campy, macho guy fighting against the system and kicking ass. That is by no means an insult. The Running Man is tons of fun. It's what you want out of an Arnold movie: quippy one-liners, machismo ass-kicking, and a sense of the underdog beating the system. What's interesting about these two adaptations is the book ends completely differently. In the book, which I have not personally read, ends with Ben finding out that his family was murdered and him taking a plane and crashing into the network skyscraper to kill the game show host at the center of it all. It's much more bleak and very down ending than the movies. But what would have been more interesting in what these try to say about society's obsession with violence or the government's, possible fascism and these large worldly ideas, but both go into a more surface level fun romp action movie. Nothing against those, but the idea is such a cool concept for a film that I wish they had more of an artistic flair to them. Maybe similar to how Ridley Scott did the dystopian sci-fi with Blade Runner. Now, with The Running Man out, I wanted to recommend some movies I feel are fitting to this kind of plot, but less of its style. There's always something exhilarating about a movie where someone is being chased or on the run or being hunted. It's naturally very cinematic and thrilling. So here are a few recommendations with that similar idea to it. First up is 2015's Run All Night. Run All Night stars Liam Neeson, Ed Harris, Joel Kinnaman, Boyd Holbrook. It follows Jimmy Conlon, played by Neeson, a former hitman and lifelong best friend of mob boss Sean McGuire, played by Harris. Conlon spends his days drunk and sitting alone in his cold apartment, only coming to McGuire when he needs money or to get a drink. One night, when a deal goes wrong for the son of McGuire, Jimmy's son is a witness to a murder, and Jimmy kills his best friend's son in order to defend his own, thus beginning a night of corrupt cops, hitmen, and the McGuire empire hunting down Conlon and his son. This one was just really brief, but I know this isn't revered as some top-tier action film or even some top-tier Neeson action film, but for the life of me, I can't see why this isn't more well-received, to at least some degree. This is a great Liam Neeson action film that has a lot more character and backstory and history to these characters than a lot of his other ones do. The dynamic between Conlon and McGuire is absolutely terrific and a really great clashing of these two great acting giants, really giving you the sense of a lifelong friendship being turned into dust over one night. The action at times does feel a bit stiff and not so versatile like some of other Neeson's films, but for me, the story is what makes it more engaging. I know this is a personal one and not so much as a critical darling, but I do implore you to give a shot, with Run All Night. If you like a movie where a father and son are hunted down in a giant New York City in the dirt and alleyways, and just like the griminess of New York City, this one is for you. Next up is 2003's The Hunted, directed by William Friedkin. It follows a tracker, played by Tommy Lee Jones, who is tasked with finding a serial killer, played by Benicio del Toro, in the Pacific Northwest. What I always love about what Friedkin does out of his films that I've seen is he really gives you a tangible feeling of the environment that he sets you in. The mountains have this incredibly isolated feeling, and when you follow Aaron, Del Toro's character, you really feel like the prey being hunted by the predator. Now, aside from being a cutthroat, violent thriller, it also under the surface really abhors how this former soldier has done and what he's done since leaving the service. But it also blurs the lines between being a black and white villain. Of course, he shouldn't be doing these things, but who he goes after is a different discussion altogether. He has a brief monologue with his first victims we see on screen as they are hunting for animals. Maybe it's legal and normal, but he makes the case for it being immoral. And that is a fascinating parallel between that and how he's being hunted by Tommy Lee Jones's Bonham character. The thrills are not in short supply here either. There is a very tense sequence, specifically in the first half, where Bonham is searching for Aaron. He retraces steps using his tracking instincts, and the entire time, from the moment he ventures out on his own, you get this feeling he's being watched, where he even senses and is cautious. I won't spoil how the scene goes, but it's absolutely exhilarating. I really love how Friedkin here plays with the predator and prey angle, both in character with the history that Aaron and Bonham share, and with the way the action plays out. A small tidbit about this film, I remember going into a Blockbuster every weekend when I was a kid and always seeing the poster cover on the shelves and being so interested and curious as to what it was. Of course, I wasn't some cinephile when I was that young, just a kid in elementary school. But whenever I see the poster for this film, I always think of that. Now that I finally got to see it, incredible action thriller, and if you like that kind of like Pacific Northwest in the mountains thriller, then I'd highly recommend 2003's The Hunted. Alright, the next one is 1993's The Fugitive, directed by Andrew Davis, another movie starring Tommy Lee Jones. It follows Richard Kimball, played by Harrison Ford, a vascular surgeon in Chicago who is accused of killing his wife in cold blood. On his way to prison, after being sentenced to death for her murder, other prisoners plot an escape and derail the bus onto an active train track, which is then crashed into, thus letting Kimball escape. The Fugitive is absolutely terrific. and is well regarded as a staple in guys being hunted or on the run films. Harrison Ford is absolutely incredible here and not at all what I personally expected from him in his performance. He's subdued, scared, yet outsmarting everyone at every step, as is Tommy Lee Jones as U.S. Deputy Marshal Samuel Gerard. Gerard is someone who is assured in his ability to get criminals at every turn, yet he's so fun and witty for even Tommy Lee Jones, which is so fun. What I love about how Davis goes about this story is it never feels like, oh, this character was here just a few hours ago because here's a clue. Let's find a plot device to conveniently find his next step. Every time they are close to each other and chase Kimball in Chicago, he's in sight and sometimes within a few feet of each other. Each time this happens, Davis keeps you on the edge of your seat to make you feel like each time he's actually going to get caught. While a side plot might seem like it derives from the story, it actually gives the hunt so much more meaning. While being chased, Kimball's looking for clues and the man who killed his actual wife. Without giving much away, the culmination of his profession while on the hunt really gives a much bigger weight to the film and more stakes to the chase than just running from the law for the heck of it. The Fugitive is obviously, of course, it's set in Chicago, so I love it for that reason too. But it's such a great thriller that if you like this kind of genre, again, of course, why I'm recommending it. But this is a classic and a staple for every single reason you could imagine. All right, this next one is a classic in this subgenre or this kind of movie, but it's a classic and a staple in cinema history on its own right. It is 1959's North by Northwest, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and it's obviously and of course an incredibly influential film and deserves to be mentioned if you've never seen it. It follows Richard Thornhill, an ad executive who is mistaken for a government agent and then hunted by spies. This is one of the best being on the run or being hunted films, and obviously, like I mentioned, a staple in cinema history for a reason. The mystery from the beginning to end keeps you on your toes, right up to the famous set piece that is set on Mount Rushmore. Cary Grant was a movie star unlike any other we've ever seen, and I don't believe we'll ever see one like him again. He carries his wit and charm with such vulnerability here. He doesn't always present himself like the most noble or moral hero archetype, even though that's how the character kind of presents himself. And he's really not. I mean, he's an ad executive. He kind of, mentions some things at the top that you wouldn't really like a person being like if you're going to root for them. He has many chances at his freedom and is always bested and conspired against at almost every turn. And of course, that's the plot, but the story plays against his type and his archetype so well. I know if you've seen this, you don't need to be told, but the plane scene in the fields near the end of the film is so iconic for a reason. What Hitchcock does with space isolation is truly one of a kind. What he usually does with confined spaces or single rooms, he gives the same suspense and tension with the plane chasing a man in an open field. And the fact that they did all this practically at the time is astonishing. It's truly something remarkable to behold, especially for a film that's nearly 70 years old. Not that it's inherently a bad thing, but what always doesn't do it for me with a lot of older films in the 50s and 40s is a sort of forced romance. This one is a good side plot and it is a good romance, but it doesn't feel like it needed to be there to make it great. It doesn't really detract from it, but it's just a personal little tiny nitpick. It just felt like it was something more of a product of the audience's attention and Hollywood at the time. But if you're going to watch any movies on this that you haven't seen, North by Northwest, I think is the first one you should start at. The final recommendation is 2024's Strange Darling. Strange Darling was a surprise to everyone who saw it, I believe, when it came out last year. Directed by J.T. Molnar, it follows two people who meet, have a night of intimacy, and then when things get taken a little too far, it becomes a cat and mouse chase of the man hunting the woman, with lots of unexpected twists and turns, and obviously I'm not going to spoil those. This is a grimy and borderline sadistic thriller, not in a gory way, but in its characters who are violent, but not twisted or villainous in a kind of obvious cartoonish kind of way. Kyle Gallner is one of the most fascinating and interesting young actors in the genre space today. He was good in Smile, and really good in this little film I saw called The Passenger. So I really want to see what he does going forward. But Strange Darling is where I feel was a big breakthrough for him onto the scene, and for good reason. He's menacing, has lots of layers to him that kind of unfold as the movie progresses. A lot that can be discovered in his initial meeting with this young girl, played by Willa Fitzgerald, who is equally fantastic as a woman who's on the run, terrified from this murderer hunting her after a night together. This is a film that has lots of reveals, a non-linear structure, so I don't want to spoil too much with specific set pieces or scenes, because then that kind of plays into the reveals and, again, the non-linear structure of the story and the plot. So I want to try and be as very vague as possible. But honestly, this was just a huge surprise when I first saw it. If you check it out, I really hope you do check it out. I hope it's as surprising for you as well. All right. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about The Running Man and some other recommendations today. Thank you for the 2-week wait. I'm hoping to get back into the weekly groove of things. I'm going to have a bonus episode out this week. Check out the last episode where I did my second director dive on Guillermo del Toro. That was so much fun to talk about and one of my favorite directors, so I really hope you check it out. If you like any of these recommendations today or are interested in any of them, here's where you can stream them or watch. The Running Man 2025 is in theaters. The 1987 Running Man is on Paramount Plus. The Hunted is on Paramount Plus. Strange Darling is also on Paramount Plus. North by Northwest currently is on Tubi. The Fugitive and Run All Night you can watch or you can rent or buy on digital. Next week, I want to do something fun and give some recommendations to some movies you might have missed this year. Maybe you hadn't heard of them or didn't get a chance to see. So that should be lots of fun. I'll kind of go through some of my favorites so far this year, but not give too much away. I want to do something at the end of the year for my favorites of the year. You can keep up to date with the show on Instagram at PodWatchMovies and on Bluesky at watchmoremovies.bsky.social. Please subscribe, Apple or Spotify, YouTube. Leave a comment on YouTube if you have any other recommendations in this kind of subgenre. I would love to hear them. Follow me on Letterboxd as well at just Ricky D. I update as I watch movies, so if you want to know what I'm watching, even podcasts unrelated, you can see it all there. And until next time, watch more movies.